Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Kaylee Ogden, I'm a writer, and I am the Vampire Girl. Today, we are going to be going over my favorite book of all time, Bram Stoker's Dracula. I've read this book more times than I can count, more times than is probably healthy, and my sanity has been reduced to putty and joy and giddiness because of the contents of these books. These pages is what I was going to say. From the content of these pages. It's been a long night, guys. Bear with me. As I've been considering how I wanted to go through this book and talk about it, I've gone through a lot of different formats. I've gone through a lot of different ideas of how much I want to talk about, how much I want to leave up to you guys, the reader, to discover, because I could talk about this book for hours. I have talked about this book for hours. My poor roommate, bless her heart, she's so patient with me when I get into a Dracula rant. So many people that I know have brought up Dracula, or brought up a movie, or brought up something to do with the Count, and I have just gone. So, I apologize to anybody that I've ever done that to, but I'm not sorry. Not sorry. Read the book, and then we'll talk. Maybe I'll be sorry if you read the book. So, what I finally decided upon for this analysis video is I just want to talk through some of the major moments of the plot, and then I want to focus a lot on the characters, because for me, character is where this book really shines, and a lot of the times, character is what nobody talks about. Everybody knows Dracula, many people know Mina, many people know Renfield, but unless you've read the book, you're missing out on a lot of really great content, a lot of really great relationships, and a lot of really great lines. So, without further ado, let's get into Dracula. We start in Transylvania, where we're following a young up-and-coming solicitor named Jonathan Harker. What can I say about Jonathan? I didn't like Jonathan the first couple of times that I read the book. I found him average, boring, average. Jonathan was an everyman to me before I even knew what an everyman was. But the more that I read, and the more that I got into the book, and the more that I started experiencing Jonathan's personality and his perspective, the more I got to really like him. He was so much more than any of the movies that I'd seen up to that point portrayed him as. He's strong, and he's in a situation that a lot of people don't normally find themselves in. So he's reacting the best way that he knows how. What situation? Well, he is traveling through a land that he knows nothing of. He's only read about in books, and he's experiencing for the first time. And then things aren't what he expects. You know, the people are quaint. They're not the high-class, highly educated people that he's used to in London, until he meets the Count. The Count. When Jonathan meets the Count, he sees this old, strange, kind-hearted man who welcomes him into his castle, and who is just interested in moving to London, leaving the countryside behind, leaving behind his past, and moving into the teeming, bustling, lively streets of Jonathan's home country. Jonathan is more than welcome, or more than happy to assist the Count, especially since he's probably going to net a pretty good little commission on it. Which, you know, I would ignore warnings and red flags and all that stuff if I knew I could make a good bit of cash. Don't read too much into that, though. Mom, I promise I'm fine. However, the longer Jonathan stays with the Count, the stranger things that he starts to notice. He notices wolves hanging out near the castle. He notices that all of the doors are locked. He notices that the Count has a strange habit of climbing out of his window and scaling the walls of the castle head first. And he notices that the Count doesn't really seem to want him to leave. Of course, he says, the Count says that it's because he wants to learn from Jonathan. He wants to learn how to speak English properly. He wants to learn about London. He wants to learn all of he can so that he can fit in better. Because a man would not see him. There is not, Dracula has this line about how if he were to go to London now, as he was, there was no man there who would not know him for a stranger. A stranger in a strange land, men know him not, and to know not is to care not for. Of course, this is just so Dracula can blend in and eat everyone, but, you know, to each his own. Jonathan realizes that he's trapped, and so he begins looking for ways out. He explores the castle and ends up falling asleep in a room where he really should not have been. This is where he meets Dracula's wives. Now, they're not referred to as his wives in the book in so many words. That's just about what they've become known as. There's movies about the brides of Dracula. Actually, a really great movie with Peter Cushing. Peter Cushing. Dead daddy. Great man. Great actor. Sorry. My old man fetish is showing through. Cut that, editing me. Please, cut that. We don't need people knowing about that. Jonathan falls asleep, and when he wakes up, he's surrounded by these three beautiful women. Now, I've talked in my spoiler-free review about how a lot of people consider this book about sexuality and purity and not giving into temptation, and I agree. I can definitely see where they're coming from, especially in moments like this, where Jonathan claims to be disgusted by his desire for the wives. However, when I read this as somebody who is not super into sex, who is not, you know, I have no sex, I'm asexual, please keep your genitals away from my face. Editing me, please cut that. Oh my god. Editing me, please cut that. Someone like me, who focuses more on platonic relationships than sexual or even romantic ones, I see this scene differently. When Jonathan says that he is disgusted by his own desires for this woman, when he's talking about how much this woman makes him afraid and how animal-like she is in her beauty and her movements and the way that she licks her mouth and the way that she approaches him, I don't see it as such a sexual thing. I see it more as Jonathan not being afraid so much of the woman, but afraid of the things that she might make him do. Sexuality is fine. Have your sex, do it consensually and safely, of course. I'm not going to deny anybody that. But there's something to be said about the difference between giving into your desires and having your desires and being ruled by desire. Vampires inherently represent a lavish and addictive lifestyle. They are excess incarnate. So when I read this, I don't see it so much as being afraid of sex. I see it more as being afraid of being ruled by desire. Thankfully, the Count comes in and, you know, pulls the wives away and effectively saves Jonathan's life for at least another day or two, because of course he's not done with him yet. Something fascinating happens though here at the end of this scene, and I feel like even I've read this book. I'm not kidding when I say that I have gone through this book probably 40 times. Just through the audiobook version especially, reading it for this analysis, reading it to review it. I've gone through the book a lot. And only recently have I noticed the end of this scene. It's the end of chapter 3. The wives begin to mock Drac for protecting Jonathan, for treating him with such favoritism. And they tell Drac, let me see if I can find the line. The women say to Drac, "You yourself never loved. You never love." On this, the other women joined, and such a mirthless, hard, soulless laughter rang through the room that it almost made me faint here. It seemed like the pleasure of fiends. Then the Count turned, after looking at my face attentively, and said in a soft whisper, "Yes, I too can love. You yourselves can tell that from the past. Is it not so?" This moment, it's so different from how it changes my perspective on the Count slightly. He's still evil, he's still scary, he's still very icky, but we see a glimpse of the man that he could be, and honestly, some of the adaptation romances might be focusing on the wrong character here. In my spoiler-free review, I mentioned that it's suspected that Stoker was a closeted gay man, and moments like this lead people to posit that theory a little more, and I'm here for it. Drac is bi king. Dracula is our new bi king. Get it, Count. After the first 4 chapters, we move into England. We change perspectives. We leave Jonathan behind in Transylvania to solve his own problems because he's a grown man. He'll be fine, I'm sure. He'll be fine. Don't worry about him. We move to primarily 2 perspectives. One perspective that we focus on a lot is Mina, who is Jonathan's fiance, who is my favorite character. I love Mina. The second perspective that takes up most of the book is that of Dr. Seward. Dr. Seward is friends with Mina's friend, Lucy. He runs a lunatic asylum that happens to be right next to the house that Dracula buys. The estates are right next to each other. They're separated by a wall, literally. And Dr. Seward's perspective takes up a fat chunk of this book, which boggles my mind why he's not one of the most recognizable characters in a lot of adaptations. I know I keep talking about adaptations, and we'll talk more about them in the coming weeks. Next week, I'm doing a whole article about adaptation, a whole video about it. Dr. Seward is a great character. Chapter 5, it's a letter exchange between Mina and Lucy, who is her best friend. Lucy tells us about 3 men that proposed to her all on the same day, which is adorable. Lucy is probably the most sexualized character in this book when it's not Mina. Because Lucy has more than platonic feelings for each of these 3 men. Again, somebody who focuses more on the platonic than the sexual or the romantic. So maybe I'm just interpreting this differently than everybody else, which is fine. All interpretations are valid, as long as you can find support for them on page. That's what my professor said. I've had professors say that. That's what I'm going with. When Lucy talks about each of these 3 men, there's only one that she really seems to be in love with. And that's not to say that she can't have sexual feelings for John or for Quincy, who is a Texan from America, and he's an adventurer, and he's bold, and he's hilarious. We love Quincy. And Quincy is the one who always gets backhanded in these adaptations. He gets kicked to the friggin' curb. He's never in them, and it makes me sad because he's so... Sorry. I told you, these characters, man. Lucy, of the 3 proposals, she chooses the man who is last to propose. She could have said yes to John, Dr. Seward, Jack. I'll probably call him Jack for most of the review, just because we already have a Jonathan. She could have said yes to Jack. She could have said yes to Quincy. And then there's Arthur. Arthur is baby. I will fight anyone who says otherwise. Arthur is the most quiet, unintrusive, stalwart man in the book. All of the characters are great. All of the men are fantastic and brave and noble and loyal. Arthur is so unassuming. He is the quiet, soft baby that you just love. Arthur is baby. And he is so devoted to Lucy that there is never a doubt in your mind which man she is going to pick, because she talks about Arthur like she talks about no one else. She can't even put into words what his proposal means to her. She tells Mina a long paragraph about John's proposal and a long paragraph about Quincy's proposal. And she tells Mina, "Need I tell you of number 3? Because it's just something that is so special. She can't put it into words." And that is so romantic to me, because a lot of times you meet that one person and you just know. Yeah, other men will catch your fancy, they'll make you laugh, they will fascinate you, they will flatter you, they will make you feel good. But there's that one person that is unlike anyone else. And that, the romance between Lucy and Arthur, is something that I love about this book so much, and it's so short-lived. Before we get into why it's so short-lived, as I'm sure many people can guess what's going to happen, because it's a vampire book, and it's Dracula, and it's... I wanted to talk about one more character before we get into the meat of the story. One character who's in here for about a chapter and a half, who no one ever talks about. Before I started getting back into Dracula, because I read it when I was young, I read it through school, I hadn't read it for a few years, and when I got back into it, I was like, wait, who is this guy? I don't remember this guy. Chapter 5. End of chapter 5, started chapter 6. Chapter 6, not chapter 5. Chapter 6, we are introduced to an old man named Mr. Swales. And Mina meets him when she is just hanging out at the cliffs above Whitby Bay. She just goes up to the cliffside to think and to write and to just be alone with her thoughts. And she meets Mr. Swales, and they start talking about legends and about ghost stories, and he has no time for foolishness. He knows, he comes with this older wisdom. Like, he's been around the bend, and he knows that there are things in the world to be more afraid of than legends and ghosts and stuff like that. Mr. Swales is fascinating because he's almost a foil to Dracula. Dracula and Mr. Swales they both come with this wisdom and with this arrogance that comes with old age, and they're both easily dismissed, or people think they're silly just because they look a certain way, they're from a certain place, they talk a certain way. Mr. Swales, he uses local slang. He has a very thick accent that Stoker actually writes into the book, which is one reason I recommend the audiobook, because when the narrator reads Mr. Swales' dialogue, you feel like you can understand it more, just because of the tone they use. Fantastic. But he talks about death in such a fascinating way. And then, when Dracula makes it to Whitby, Mr. Swales is the first person that he kills. And this is just coincidence. Mr. Swales was on the cliffs. Dracula came across him. He died. But the fact that Mr. Swales is the first person that Dracula kills in Whitby is really interesting to me, because he is this older, wiser person who knows that death is coming, but doesn't fear it, whereas the Count fears death. That's why the Count has lived so long, because he's so careful, and he does everything he can to avoid his own death. Let's talk about how Drac gets to Whitby. So, I hate to keep saying, if you know Dracula, you know the ship scene, because not everybody knows Dracula. My friend who's a writer, I got her to start reading Dracula, and she had no idea what to expect. And I was shocked, because I'm like, everybody knows Dracula, at least in some form. Like, how do you not know this? But I will try to curb my fanaticism and tell you about the ship. To get to England, Drac boards a ship called the Demeter. It's called the Vespa. It's called the I can't remember anything but Vespa at this point. Anyway, he boards a ship called the Demeter, and it's a Russian ship, and he takes it all the way to England. And by the time the ship gets to Whitby, the only person left on board is the corpse of the captain. The captain, in a last-ditch effort to save himself and to save his ship, tied himself to the wheel in order that when his strength began to fade, he would still be able to pilot the ship. Pilot the ship, steer the ship, captain the ship. Dude's hardcore. He's not a captain that's going to go down with the ship. He's a captain that knows that he's going to get his ship into port. Drac kills everyone on board in the course of his journey, and it's pretty friggin' intense. The captain describes, as each man is slowly picked off over the course of days, how the first mate goes down into the depths of the ship when it's just the first mate and the captain left, and he knows that the pale man with the red eyes is down in the brig, and he goes down to kill him, and he comes up screaming, knowing, and he screams something along the lines of, I know the truth. I could open the book and find the line. I'm not going to. It's late. I'm tired. I've tried filming this thing 65 times. I'm not going to open the book. But he comes up screaming something along the lines of, I know the truth now. And you'd better come with me, Captain, before you learn it too, or something along those lines. But he tells the captain he better come with him, and then he throws himself off the edge of the ship. Like I said, Captain doesn't leave. He stays with the ship, and he dies because of it. Miraculously, the ship finds its way into port. And then trouble begins. One of my favorite scenes is right after this. It's right after the ship gets into port. It's right after we know that the Count has landed. We as the audience know what was really on that ship. We know what killed the crew. So Lucy begins to sleepwalk. Mina is staying with Lucy for the summer. I can't remember if I mentioned that. Mina is staying with Lucy at Lucy's house, and Lucy starts sleepwalking. Mina wakes one night, and she finds that Lucy has made it out of the house. She has sleepwalked her way all the way up to the cliffs where Mina likes to sit, where she met Mr. Swales, that cliff above the bay. Mina goes out looking for Lucy, and she sees her from the cliffside on the opposite end. So she can barely see her from the other cliff. So it's like the bay and then a cliff and a cliff. The way cliffs usually work. So Mina starts booking it up to that cliffside to get to Lucy. And as she approaches, it's like she sees something bent over Lucy, and all she sees is a pale face and red eyes. But when she comes around, it's an abbey. There's an abbey at the cliff top. She comes around the side of that, and the figure is gone, and it's just Lucy. So she thinks she imagined it. Mina tries to wake Lucy, and she gives Lucy her shawl, and then she sees that Lucy is barefoot. So she gives Lucy her shoes, and Lucy wakes, and she seems to be in distress. Like she keeps grabbing at her throat. It's like she can't breathe, and then she wakes and she's normal. Then the two of them start going back down the cliffside, and Lucy notices that Mina is like wincing every time she takes a step, and she notices that Mina's not wearing shoes, so Lucy tries to give Mina her shoes back, but Mina is just like, no, I'm fine. You are my friend. I need to take care of you. You know, you're the wealthy young woman who is out at night in her nightgown. What are people going to say if they see that you are barefoot and whatever? So what Mina does, and I think this is really clever, actually, this is like A tier, is she dips her feet in mud so that if anybody does come across them, they won't notice that she's barefoot. I think that's just really, I think that's a nice little touch, that's a nice little stroke of cleverness. But this is just something that I love, that Mina is the kind of friend who doesn't, like, she can deal with some rocks in her toes just to make sure that her friend doesn't get sick and isn't disgraced if she's seen in such a state. And I think that's really cool. And I think that's something that's missing from Mina's character a lot of the time. I love her. Mina's efforts are not totally successful, though, and Lucy does fall ill. She falls really, really ill. She's pale, she's lethargic, she's got these two marks on her neck that Mina Mina thinks she caused when Mina gave Lucy her cloak. She used a safety pin to pin the cloak, and so she's like, ah, crap, you know, I got my friend with a safety pin, and oh my gosh, I'm the worst. Seeing that Lucy is so sick, Mina calls on Jack. She calls Dr. Seward, and Dr. Seward comes over, and he starts to take care of Lucy. He is her primary physician, but even he can't figure out what's going on. So he has to call on his own, it's not his doctor, his old mentor. We are 9 chapters in before we get to Van Helsing. Van Helsing does not come into this book till chapter 9. Name a more iconic character from this book besides Dracula, and it's Van Helsing. 9 chapters. So, Van Helsing comes as a favor to Jack. Van Helsing, he's from Amsterdam. He is from the Netherlands, and he comes over because Jack is a good friend of his, and because Jack saved his life in the past, so he feels indebted. They just have a really great, not just mentor-student relationship, but also camaraderie, I guess. So Van Helsing comes, and he starts to examine Lucy, and he almost immediately can tell what's wrong, especially when she starts describing that she's having nightmares about bats and wolves howling, and she feels herself, she feels like her soul is detaching from her body. She's just not feeling too hot. And Van Helsing is really interesting because he takes immediate action, and because he takes an immediate affinity towards Lucy. There's just something about Lucy that entrances people, which I wonder if that's one of the reasons Dracula chooses her, not just because she's out wandering, but because she has the ability to get people to do what she wants them to do. Van Helsing is immediately not smitten with her, but he's like, this young woman is very sweet and very kind, and she's really sick and she needs my help. So let's help her. Over the course of Lucy's illness, there's a lot of ups and there's a lot of really big downs. There's a moment in this book that is so heartbreaking that I don't know if I want to share it, because I just want you to experience it yourself. It's chapter 11, I think. I'm pretty sure it's chapter 11. And it just, the second you read this event, your heart sinks, and Van Helsing's heart sinks because he knows what's happened, and it's a lot. It's really, it's great. So, through the course of Lucy's illness, every time she has a really bad relapse, they have to give her a blood transfusion. Now, remember, guys, this is 1897. Blood types and matching donors weren't really a necessity. Were they even a thing in 1897? I doubt it, but there are 4 separate blood transfusions through the course of Lucy's illness. The first one is Arthur. Arthur gets there just in time the first time to give his blood to Lucy. The second time, it is Jack. Jack is the second transfusion. Third time is Van Helsing, and the fourth time is Quincy. Quincy is just, and Quincy comes in clutch. He just happens to be at the house. What happens is Jack and Van Helsing get to the house, and they find that Lucy is basically dead. And so they start trying to revive her. They are warming her. There's this really awesome moment where I think I just imagined it cinematically of they draw a bath for her, and then they pick her up fully clothed. Don't you get your minds get your minds, reel them in, and they put her in the bath, and they're just warming her. Trying to revive Lucy this last time. A maid comes and says there's a messenger from Arthur, and Jack just says, okay, just let him in, make him wait. We're in the middle of something. We're in the middle of trying to save a life, bro. Okay, give us some space. And then the messenger ends up being Quincy, and Quincy's like, hook me up. No hesitation, no pause to think. He's like, Lucy's in danger and I can help. Get me in there right now. Please, let me help. And Quincy is just a really good, he's just a good man. And he's a baby. Quincy is also baby. All of them are baby. But it seems like no matter the amount of transfusions, no matter the garlic that Van Helsing hangs in Lucy's room, no matter how careful they try to be, Lucy succumbs to the shock and to the blood loss. She succumbs to the illness. As Van Helsing knows that she is about to die, Arthur is there, of course, because he is her fiance. And let me find the moment. Chapter 12. Actually, this is the right chapter. I opened right up to it. Nope, that is incorrect. That is not chapter 12. That is, I can't count. Roman numerals, man, they are the worst. Okay. When they bring Arthur in to say his final goodbyes, I'm using the Barnes & Noble Classic Edition, by the way. It's my favorite. They bring Arthur in to say his final goodbyes, and Lucy is coming in and out of consciousness, and she falls unconscious as they're bringing Arthur in. And when she comes back out of it, Jack notices an intense change. Her breathing grew stutterous, the mouth opened, and the pale gums drawn back made the teeth look longer and sharper than ever. In a sort of sleep-waking, vague, unconscious way, she opened her eyes, which were now dull and hard at once, and said in a soft, voluptuous voice, such as I had never heard from her lips, Arthur, oh my love, I'm so glad you have come. Kiss me. Arthur bent eagerly over to kiss her, but at that instant Van Helsing, who, like me, had been startled by her voice, swooped upon him, and catching him by the neck with both hands, dragged him back with a fury of strength which I never thought he could have possessed, and actually hurled him almost across the room. Not for your life, he said, not for your living soul and hers. And he stood between them like a lion at bay. That's something... It's moments like these that make me love this book, because we know why. We know what's going on. We know what Lucy is sick with, but Arthur doesn't. Jack doesn't. And so both of these men are shocked and angered and hurt by Van Helsing's actions. And they're hurt and shocked and angered by his actions for several more chapters after this. However, Lucy falls unconscious again after this moment. And she wakes, very shortly after. She opened her eyes in all their softness, and putting out her poor, pale, thin hand, took Van Helsing's great brown one. Drawing it to her, she kissed it. My friend, she said in a faint voice, but with untellable pathos. My true friend and his. Oh, guard him and give me peace. At this point, at the moment before she draws her last breath, Lucy knows what is happening. She knows she's a danger to the man that she loves more than anything. And she knows that Van Helsing knows. She knows that this old man who has been so good to her and who has tried so hard to keep her alive is her only hope for leaving her fiancé in protected hands. It's so sad. The next few chapters are people reacting to Lucy's death. Mina is no longer living here. She hasn't been living with Lucy for a few chapters. She has actually been, Mina has been in Budapest. She received a telegram very soon after Lucy's illness first started. She received a telegram telling her that Jonathan has been found. He's been missing for a couple of months. His letter stopped coming at the end of June. They found Jonathan, and he has been incredibly ill. They said he had a brain fever, he had a terrible shock. They found him ranting and raving about monsters and demons and boxes of earth. And they finally were able to, Jonathan finally remembered Mina, and he's staying at a monastery in Budapest. He finally had the sisters contact Mina. So she's been in Budapest with Jonathan as he's been recovering. She comes home with Jonathan. They get married in Budapest almost as soon as she arrives, actually. A day or so after she arrives in Budapest. Jonathan asks for them to finally be married. And that's adorable. Great scene. Read the book. But she and Jonathan come home, and they they meet up with Jonathan's boss, Mr. Hawkins, and Mr. Hawkins tells them that he knows that he's not long for the world, and he has no children of his own, so he leaves the business, he leaves their solicitor business, and he leaves everything that he has to Jonathan and Mina, which is a huge culture shock for them, because both Jonathan and Mina have grown up in really humble surroundings. So to suddenly be blessed with this great inheritance is really great, but it's also a lot of pressure for Jonathan to be under, because he becomes the sole proprietor of the business when Mr. Hawkins dies. And Mr. Hawkins does die in the course of the book. He dies right around the same time that Lucy does. Now, to me, this posits the question, why does Stoker tell us that Mr. Hawkins dies? Mr. Hawkins, of course, is the one who sent Jonathan to Transylvania in the first place. So, is the Count cleaning house? Is the Count tying up loose ends? Who knows? We never get confirmation. We don't even know what Mr. Hawkins dies of. We know he suffers from gout, but it's never clear what happens to Mr. Hawkins. We just know that he dies, which is odd to me. Never a wasted word, am I right, Stoker? But around the same time that Mr. Hawkins dies, Mina gets word of Lucy's death, and of course she is completely destroyed by it. Lucy is her best friend, she's her sister, they've been each other's companions for their whole lives. Lucy's family basically raised Mina after she lost her own. So Mina comes home to that tragic news. And then, while out in London one day with Jonathan has an episode, as Mina describes it. He sees somebody from across the street in London, and Mina can't understand why he's having this freak out. Jonathan is staring at this young man with a big black mustache and saying it is the Count himself. Although now he looks young. He looks full of life. So, again, we know what's going on. But Mina just thinks that Jonathan is having another shock. His brain fever is affecting him. It's coming back. So she takes him home, and she's trying to take care of him. And she knows that she can't be ignorant about what happened to him anymore. When she met him in Budapest, he gave her his journal, and he said, "I don't want there to be any secrets between us. Between a man and a wife, I don't think there should be secrets. Because I love you, I want you to know what I'm going through, or what I went through. But for the sake of my sanity, never tell me what is in this book." He gives her his journal, and she ties it closed with her hair ribbon, and she seals it, and she promises never to open it unless his health is in jeopardy, unless he needs her to open it. So after that episode in London, she decides to open the journal and read it, and she is absolutely gobsmacked. She doesn't know how to process what she's reading. What is this talk of monsters and wives and babies in sacks and wolves and men and monsters? She's worried that Jonathan really did lose his mind, but at the same time, she knows that there's more to this than what she's reading. When she gets a telegram from well-known psychologist Dr. Abraham Van Helsing, she has a little bit of hope that he'll be able to help her understand the things in the novel. Or the journal, not the novel. This is the novel. I looked at the novel. She hopes he'll be able to help her understand the things in the journal. Van Helsing meets with Mina, and I just have to mention this small little part. He meets her, and Van Helsing is where a lot of the, I don't want to say misogynistic, but kind of misogynistic, where some of those ideals of the time kind of shine through. And when he first meets Mina, he doesn't want to talk to her about vampires or anything. He's meeting with her because he read Lucy's letter, or he read Mina and Lucy's letters to each other, to try and figure out like how she came about becoming ill. And so he doesn't want to tell her any of the gruesome details. And so he's kind of like treating her as like an ignorant woman and as something to be protected. And Mina gives, he asks to see Mina's account of what happened in Whitby when she found Lucy on the cliffs. And so she gives him her journal, which she was keeping in shorthand because she's practicing shorthand. She keeps her journal in shorthand, so she gives him the shorthand version of her journal. And Van Helsing basically goes, can't read shorthand. Van Helsing can't read shorthand. So this precious, sweet, simple woman, he has to have her read the shorthand to him, which I just found hilarious, because he came in like, sweet, dearest Mina, sweet Mina, don't worry your little head about that. Oh, help. I just find that hilarious. It's one of many instances in the book where when the male characters meet Mina for the first time and they're like, oh, so it's a woman, she's very pretty, we can't talk about scary things. And she's like, bro, literally, I have lived the scary things. Calm down. And they're both, and all of the men are like, fair. You know what? You got us there. Can't say anything about that. So, but that first instance with Van Helsing is really amusing to me. They get on the topic of Jonathan's journal, and Mina gives him, at this point she's already written the journal, her journal and Jonathan's out on her typewriter in like full text. She's translated the shorthand, in case Van Helsing wanted to see them. So she gives him the shorthand journal, and then she gives him the copy of her journal as she's like, I was just messing with ya. Just a little joke that we simple women pull. Don't worry about it. So she gives him a copy of Jonathan's journal as well, and he goes away and promises to read it. He then tells Mina to tell Jonathan that everything Jonathan wrote was true. And learning that he was not crazy and that he wasn't imagining things seems to bring Jonathan back to the man that he was. It takes away a lot of the doubt that was what was truly afflicting him, which I think is interesting. I feel like Jonathan would still have a lot of that trauma, because trauma, but we need to move the novel along. It's fine. We're about halfway through at this point. A little more than halfway through. No, we're about halfway through. Chapter 14? Yeah, we're about halfway through. While Van Helsing is going back and forth between, he's going back and forth between Mina and Jonathan and Jack and the boys, Jack and them boys. Something is happening in the area around the cemetery where Lucy was buried. Children are beginning to go missing, and they are being found with little baby holes in their little baby throats. And when Van Helsing sees this, he kind of freaks out. He didn't expect vampire Lucy to be walking around so soon. So he gathers Jack and Arthur and Quincy, and it takes a lot of convincing, but he finally convinces them to go to the cemetery with him and learn what was really going on. And he's been really cryptic up to this point, and he's just been asking the men to be patient with him, and he's been asking for them to just trust him, and he'll explain everything later, and he's just kind of being an asshole. He's just not being straight with them, which is fair because they are modern men, they're of modern mentalities, they don't put much stock into the old world, into vampires. That night, though, when they see Lucy with big honking fangs walking around like she owns the cemetery, kind of hard to dismiss that. So the night that Vampire Lucy walks the cemetery and the men encounter her there, it's a big shock to poor Arthur, because let's not forget, he was in love with this. They all were. All of these men loved her. But Arthur was nothing. He was so distraught when she died. And now here she is in front of him, but at the same time, it's not her. He knows it's not her. He can tell by the look in her eyes that this is not his Lucy. The men, finally, the next day, they return to the cemetery, and they take care of Vampire Lucy. You know what I mean by take care of. They chop her head off and put a stake through her boobs. Van Helsing says that Arthur should be the one to put the stake through Lucy's heart. He should be the one to set her soul free. And Arthur agrees, and he's grateful that Van Helsing is thinking of him in that way. And after he does it, Lucy turns, after he puts the stake through her heart, Lucy loses all of the hardness, all of the coldness from her features, and she has this look of peace come over her. And this just breaks poor Arthur's heart. He's gone through so much in such a little amount of time. He's lost so much, and now he's had to put a stake through, he has had to desecrate the body of the woman that he loved most. He knows that he had to do it in order to free her soul, in order for her to rest peacefully, and in order to save the lives of people in the future. But it's still a lot for one man to ask of him, you know? How would you feel? Like, be real. Arthur is incredibly emotional, and Quincy and Jack are there for him. They grab onto him to keep him from collapsing, and they're very sympathetic towards him. We'll leave that there. We'll come back to this idea of the sympathy between the men a little bit later. It's just heartbreaking. Poor Arthur. Poor baby. The next section of the book is both sides coming together. We see Mina and Jonathan come and join Jack and Van Helsing and Arthur and Quincy. When Mina first arrives at the asylum, because that's where they all decide to stay. They all decide to stay at the asylum because it's John's house. It's a big estate. There's plenty of room for everybody. When Mina arrives first, she arrives without Jonathan. Jonathan is doing his own business somewhere else. He's tracking down his own information. Mina arrives and only Jack is home, and he sees this beautiful little woman come into the scene, and he treats her very delicately at first, and as they talk more, he realizes just how much she does know and how much she's not just a woman. I hate to use that terminology, but that's it. He realized that she's more than just this beautiful, kind, soft-spoken young woman. She asks to transcribe Jack's phonograph diary onto her typewriter so that they will have a record of everything during Lucy's illness. They'll have the record easily at hand. And Jack is really hesitant at first. So Mina says, tell you what, you read my diary, I'll read your diary, and we'll become best girlfriends. And that's basically what they do. Jack gives her some of his diary that doesn't have to do with Lucy. It's mostly stuff about Renfield and his other patients and his work. And she gives him her diary, and she transcribes those portions of his diary for him while he reads hers. And they just grow this mutual respect for each other. And Mina she gets emotional at one point when Jack is talking about Lucy. And she says something along the lines of like, you know, I know Lucy really cared about you, but I had no idea that you cared so much about her in return. Like, I knew you proposed to her, but I didn't know how genuinely you cared for her until I got a peek inside your mind. Which is just, it's so cute. Best girlfriends ever. The same thing kind of happens when Quincy and Arthur arrive. They meet Mina for the first time. And Mina, they both don't know what to make of her at first because, again, beautiful little soft-spoken woman. Victorian era men. And they both try not to talk to her about the gruesome things that they've seen and the gruesome things that they've had to do. They don't know that she already knows. So she gives them the copies of the diaries that she's been copying. She's been making copies, hand-making copies of her journal, Jonathan's journal, and now Jack's journal. Been making copies of all of these things. She gives a copy to Arthur and a copy to Quincy. And they're both kind of stunned that she's so, like, on top of things, which is adorable. And then she's very gentle with them, especially with Arthur, because she knows that Arthur's been through a lot. Because Arthur is baby. So they get on the topic, because Arthur is, you know, he's asking, you know, you compiled all of this? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, he knows how, he's just so overwhelmed that so many people are helping with this strange case. And he mentions Lucy, and he has a moment again where he starts to get emotional, and he tries to hide it. And, you know, Quincy knows him enough. Quincy steps out of the room to give Arthur a moment. But Mina sits Arthur on the couch, and she sits next to him, and she offers her sympathies to him. And Arthur has cried in this book before. He's cried when Lucy died. He cried at the funeral. He cried in the cemetery. Now he just kind of loses it. He's just, he completely breaks down. We've only gotten a glimpse of his despair, but he hasn't given himself the chance to just have a good cry. And so now he feels comfortable enough around Mina, and maybe it is because she's a woman, maybe it's because, you know, womanly sympathies and whatever. But Mina opens her arms without even thinking about how it may look or what people may say. She opens her arms, and Arthur just buries himself into her embrace and cries and lets it all out, and she just is there and comforts him. She describes it as if she's comforting her own child. And this is something that bothers me. This is one reason that it bothers me when Mina is sexualized so much, because through the whole book, yes, she considers, like, when she's bringing Lucy down from the cliff, she thinks about how things will look. But when it comes down to it, she's putting the emotions of people before things like appearance. Because if, you know, say her husband walks in when another man is in her arms and in her chest, she doesn't care. She just sees this person as suffering. This person who meant so much to somebody that she loved. And this person who's not had, he has people there for him, but he hasn't felt capable to show his emotions. And she just welcomes him in. She literally, I gotta find the line. I felt an infinite pity for him and opened my arms unthinkingly. With a sob, he laid his head on my shoulder and cried like a wearied child whilst he shook with emotion. It's just second nature to her to be a good person. There doesn't have to be, it can be construed as her inviting other men into her life, whatever, but there's something to be said for that ability to have a person, opposite gender, same gender, whatever, have a person that just lets you cry. It's so important. It's so important. 1897. It's so important. Arthur pulls himself together, and he apologizes for being a big blubbering baby. And Mina says it's fine, of course, because she's an amazing person. And she leaves Arthur to read the journals, and she goes out into the hall, and Quincy immediately asks how Arthur is, and she's like, he's okay, and Quincy is very sympathetic for his friend. And Mina can tell that he also hasn't taken the time to process his grief, so all she does is she reaches out a hand, and she takes his, and she's like, hey, let me be your friend. I was like a sister to Lucy, and since I know how much you guys loved her, let me be a sister to you as well. And Quincy tears up a little bit, but he's a big, strong man from Texas, so he doesn't cry. Mama didn't raise no crybaby. But he kisses her hand, and he tells her, yes, let us be friends. Like, if ever you need anything, call on us, and we've got your back. So, and I just think that's so damn cute. Damn it. I think it's so cute. Okay, back into the book. Back into the fray. Okay. Where am I? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so after Mina, after things start getting a little more on the ground, there's a little more, the men decide to go to Carfax, the estate which is right next to Jack's. There's the asylum and a wall, and then Drac's house. Asylum, wall, big scary vampire man. That close. They decide to go to Carfax, and they decide that Mina has outlived her usefulness. That's not the proper way to phrase it. Basically, that's not the proper way to phrase it. They decide that Mina doesn't have to be involved anymore. She is too precious to them. They have all seen horrible things. They don't want her to have to see horrible things. They're very protective of her. All of the men, Jonathan through Quincy, all of them decide that Mina should not be involved. She's not super happy about it at all. She's actually kind of pissed that she's like, guys, literally you would have no information if it wasn't for me. But she agrees because she knows that it's better for the men to be focused and not worrying that she's going to catch a fang here and there. So she's not going to catch a stray bat. So she knows that the men need to be focused when they're going after the Count. So she agrees to stay behind because she doesn't want them worrying about her while they're battling for their lives. So Mina decides to stay behind begrudgingly. And then just as the men are about to go to Carfax for the first time, Renfield asked to see Dr. Seward. And all of the men go with him. Okay, back before we get here. Jack has a patient at the asylum that he refers to as a zoophagous patient, or a life eater. This is because Renfield has a nasty habit of luring flies to his room, catching them, and then luring in spiders to feed on the flies. He even lures in a bird to feed on the spiders. He has this obsession with life and with the consumption of life. Pretty interesting considering soon after Mina arrives at the asylum, she has gone through Jack's journals and she has learned about Renfield, and she decides that she wants to talk to him. She asks John if she can meet him, and John's like, why? And she thinks that Renfield might have some information about the Count. So John's like, okay, you really want to go down to the Crazyville, but okay, So Mina goes down into the asylum and meets with Renfield, and Jack actually describes it as this. She came into the room with an easy gracefulness which would at once command the respect of any lunatic, for easiness is one of the qualities mad people most respect. So Mina and Renfield had this really casual exchange. They talk just like two normal people. Like, Renfield is very well spoken. He's very energetic. He's very well bred, at least in the way that he speaks. And the two, Mina asks him certain questions, and Renfield talks to her in a way that he's never talked to John, which is adorable. Mina has such an effect on Renfield's personality that John starts to wonder if she has some sort of magical power to put people at ease, which is adorable. So they chat for a little while, and then Jack has to go, so he tells Mina to say goodbye, and Renfield says, "Goodbye, my dear. I pray God I may never see your sweet face again," which is fair. So then we get them leaving Mina behind, which is stupid. So as they're heading off to Carfax, Renfield asks to see John. So John and the rest of the men go to see Renfield, and he's in a very good mood. He's talking very eloquently. He's introducing himself to all of the men, and he talks about knowing Arthur's father and how he's so sorry that he's recently passed. He talks about Texas and how great it is that Texas was recently joined into the Union. And he's just speaking in a manner that is not madness. And so all of the men who don't know Renfield and how his mood swings, they're all like, "This guy's a lunatic?" And John's like, "Yeah, tried to kill me a couple of times. He's scary." So then Renfield, after making pleasantries and being Renfield, he asks Jack to let him go. He asks Jack to set him free. And he's like, "Look, I'm completely sane. I'm cured. Get me out of here." And John has worked with Renfield long enough to know how his moods change. Especially recently. He's been having a lot of really strange mood swings. And John says, "Okay, maybe in a week." And Renfield's like, "No, I need to be gone tonight, right now, this moment. Get me out of here, please." And John starts to suspect things aren't quite right. They already suspect that Renfield is involved with the Count somehow. He refers to the Count as master. He's escaped the asylum and tried to escape to Carfax a couple of times. He's tried to jump the wall to get to the estate. They know that he's involved. They just don't exactly know in what capacity or how much or in what way. So Renfield starts begging. He's like, "You don't have to set me free. You can tell him to cart me away in shackles, beat me, whip me, splay me out, gut me in the street, get me out of this house before something happens." And John says no. And John starts to leave with the other men, and Renfield says very quietly, let me find the page, "You will, I trust, Dr. Seward, do me the justice to bear in mind later on that I did what I could to convince you tonight." Should've listened. Anyway, the next chapter is the men going to Carfax Estate, which is, they go looking for the Count, and they go looking for these boxes of earth that he brought with him. Because according to Van Helsing, vampires can only rest in native soil. There's some stuff about holy earth versus unholy earth, earth that is blessed by man, and earth that is blessed by God. It's kind of weird. I didn't understand it all, but box o' dirt, bad. Good for vamp, bad for boy. Stop box earth dot earth box coffin boy. So they go looking. There are supposed to be 50 boxes. When they get to Carfax, there are only 29, which means that the Count has moved 21 of the boxes into other places, and they have to find those other places. Not good. When they get back to the asylum that night, Jonathan notes that Mina is looking rather pale, as she sleeps, and she sleeps for a really long time because he wakes up before her the next morning, and he's like, oh man, she must have just been so stressed out, how pale she is and how sleepy she is. Couldn't possibly be anything else. Couldn't possibly be anything else. Dumb, Johnny, dumb. Then we get to my favorite chapter. Chapter 21. I almost don't want to talk about it, but I have to. Chapter 21. When I was putting my notes together for the analysis, I called it the chapter where choices have consequences. So in the chapter where they decide to leave Mina behind and they decide to ignore Renfield, that is the chapter where choices are made. Chapter 21 is the chapter where the choices have consequences. And boy, howdy are they big ones. Mina has been getting worse as the days pass. The men have been out searching for the Count, searching for his other boxes of earth, searching for other houses that he may have purchased without Jonathan knowing. They're just looking for him, and over these days, Mina starts getting paler. She gets more lethargic. The men just attribute it to stress and to womanly things, I guess. Because, you know, she's a woman, and it's 1897. The attendant, who has been guarding Renfield's room, rushes into John's office. And he tells him that Renfield has met with some kind of terrible accident. So, John rushes to Renfield's room, and Van Helsing meets him there. Or Van Helsing comes in a minute later. But John rushes to the room and finds that Renfield is in a bad way. He's laying in a pool of his own blood. His face is bashed in and horribly bruised. His back is broken. And the attendant is like, I was here the whole time. No one came in, no one went out. I thought I heard him talking to somebody at some point, but there was nobody else in the room, and so he must have fallen out of bed or like pitched himself onto the floor. I don't know. And John's like, chill. You're not getting fired. Go away. Van Helsing comes in, and they both start trying to attend to Renfield. And they do their doctor stuff. They work. Arthur and Quincy are woken up, and so they come to see what's going on. And they manage to rouse Renfield. And Renfield, it's so sad because he wakes up and he's like, hey, Doc, what's going on? Like, I don't feel so good. Mr. Stark, I don't feel so good. It's the same thing. So he's like, I had this strange dream. And then the more he's struggling, the more Renfield realizes that it wasn't a dream at all. And he's like, you guys need to listen to me quickly because I'm dying. And I need to tell you these things before I die because I don't want to, I can't die with all of this shit on my conscience. Renfield, besides Mina, is probably my favorite character in this book. And this chapter is why. Mina and Renfield. Renfield meets Mina in chapter 19 or so. And he gains so much respect for her in just that one conversation. And he knows that she is staying in the asylum, where he is also a resident. And he knows that if Dracula calls, he will have to act. And he knows that if Drac asks to be invited in, he will have to invite him in. Which is why he asks Seward to send him away. Renfield knows what could happen to Mina if the Count gets into the house. He hasn't so far. Then Renfield describes how Dracula came to him and stood outside his window and basically promised him all the lives that Renfield could ever consume if he'll just invite him in. And Renfield, in the throes of desire, invites the Count in. He invites in the master. Then he sees Mina again. She comes down to visit him, and he can see how pale she is. And he, the raving lunatic that nobody has listened to so far, can see what is happening to her when the freaking professional vampire hunter can't. Renfield sees that the Count has been draining the life from Mina. And he is not about to let that happen again. So when the Count comes into Renfield's room, Renfield is lying in wait. And he says that he's heard that madmen possess incredible strength, and so he thinks he's going to be able to wrestle the Count and kill him. Renfield is so angry and is so determined to protect Mina's life that he tries to wrestle a vampire. He throws his own desires and his own promises of wealth and life and rewards. He throws everything the Count has promised him out the window in order to protect the woman that he has met twice. Because she showed him common human decency. She treated him with respect. She didn't treat him like he was a lunatic. She didn't treat him like he was lesser than her. She treated him with human dignity and respect. And he was not about to let the Count take that away. He was not about to let him kill this woman who has been the only person to show him kindness. Renfield tells the men this, and they realize how badly they have screwed up. They run immediately to Mina's room. I gotta gather myself for this part. This singular part of the book is why I take so much issue with Dracula and Mina being thrown into a romantic pairing. They burst into the bedroom where Mina and Jonathan have been staying. And Jonathan is still asleep in the bed. The Count has Mina by her wrists, and he is holding her to his chest, and they describe it as he has both of her hands in one of his, and his other hand is pressing her face into his chest. He is assaulting her in her own bed. And people found that romantic. People found that as an allegory for feminine sexuality. I don't think so. They managed to chase Drac away. And then Mina tells them of what happened. When Mina's telling the story, she describes how this mist came into the room, and she didn't realize what it was until it started to take shape, and then she recognized the pale face and the red eyes from the cliffside. She recognized just who it was that had been coming to her every night. And before she can react, he grabs her, and he says, he grabs this woman and looks her in the eyes and says, "You scream, I will bash out your husband's brains right in front of you. You fight me, I will kill him." And then he bites her, and he feeds from her, and then he forces her to feed from him. And Mina describes it as suffocating. He was pressing her against his chest with so much force that she could not breathe. She had to either suffocate or swallow some of his blood. It's horrific. It is assault. Dracula's not a romance, people. Also, fun fact. Let's flash back to how Renfield could see Mina for what she was before any of her closest friends could. The Count does not target Mina because she is a woman. He does not target Mina because he's looking for a wife. He doesn't target Mina because he's looking for a lover. He targets Mina because she is clever. He targets Mina because she is instrumental in his takedown. He knows the part that she has been playing in the hunt against him. And he knows how much she means to the rest of the party. He doesn't see her as a woman, he sees her as a threat. So, he makes her his servant. At least he tries to. It's kind of a long process. Mina is... The whole party is shocked. They decide, smartfully, that Mina should probably no longer be excluded. Like, okay, Mina, you can come back into our clubhouse so that scary vampire guy doesn't eat you anymore. Sorry, our bad. Dumb. Sorry. Dracula's not a romance kid. After this, they start hunting for Dracula with more gusto. And Mina's not an idiot. She knows what she may become capable of. So she makes the men promise that if they're not able to get to the Count in time before she turns, she makes the men promise that they will kill her. And she makes Jonathan promise to be the one to do it. And he struggles with that. Like, what would you do? What would you do if the woman you love more than anything on the planet came to you and was like, hey, you better kill me before I kill you? That's a lot to ask of somebody, but Jonathan, he stacks up and he's like, okay. Van Helsing, though, says that Mina has to stay alive until they can kill the Count. Unless she dies before they can get the Count. So they start tracking, and they start going after the Count even harder, which he probably should have figured would happen. Like, duh. So the Count freaks out because the men have found all of his earth boxes, except for one. So he runs. He runs for it. He's a little baby coward. The Count makes a run for it, and he starts heading back to Transylvania. And the men are like, okay, we can take a breather. He's gone. Like, where's the problem? Van Helsing reminds them that Dracula can basically live forever, and Mina can't. So, knowing that they can't just let the Count get away and just wash their hands of everything, they take chase. They make chase. They go after the boy. Give chase. They give chase. Knowing that they can't just let the Count get away, the men give chase. And using the connection that Mina and Dracula have formed from them sharing each other's blood, they're able to track down Dracula. They're able to kind of plan the course that they think he's going to take. And eventually, the six of them split up. Two go to try to catch the Count via river, two go on horseback, and Van Helsing and Mina travel the same path that Jonathan did to get to the castle. And they're all trying to get there before the Count does. The more Van Helsing and Mina travel together, the more Van Helsing realizes that she's changing. She is sleeping all through the day. She is not even... He can't even wake her up during the day. And she's becoming calmer. She's not as afraid. They get to the castle, Mina and Van Helsing. And they make camp outside because they're not about to go in the castle because that's scary. There are scary vampire women in the castle. And there's a scene that night while they are waiting, because now all they can do is wait for the others to catch up or for the Count to show up and kill everybody. But, we're going to be optimistic. There's a scene where they're waiting, and Van Helsing makes a safe circle around himself and Mina. And Dracula's wives show up. And they kind of circle the camp, and they're calling to Mina. They're calling to their sister to come join them. Mina tells Van Helsing not to leave the safe circle. Van Helsing says that he's afraid for Mina, and she says, "Fear for me? Why fear for me? None safer in all the world from them than I am." So, Mina knows that these wives, that the vampire women are not going to harm her because she is very close to joining them, which is really, really scary. It's just that kind of quiet confidence that comes from fear. It's a very Hannibal Lecter thing, I feel like. It's like, you'll die when I want you to die. You know? Am I crazy? That's just like, that's kind of a, ooh, yeesh, yikes. Then we get to the climax. Now, some people may not like the way the book ends. I think it is friggin' ass hilarious. The men all catch up with the Count basically at the same time. And the Count is in his earth box because it's daytime and it's almost sunset. And the Count can freely move around after the sun goes down. The sun doesn't kill him. Contrary to popular belief, the Count is not not killed by sunlight. He's out in broad daylight quite a bit in the book. But he's restricted. So he's on the back of a cart. He's being carried by a group of Shgani, the gypsies, and they have been paid pretty handsomely to guard his cart, to guard his box. And the group of men fight the Shgani, and Quincy and Jonathan both end up on top of the cart, and they open the box. They throw open the lid of the box, and there's the Count, and the sun is literally setting, and the Count is like, when I read this, I imagined him like putting his hands on the sides of the box to be ready to pull himself out of it. And Quincy and Jonathan are like, nah, stay. And they both slam their knives down into the Count at the same time. And that's how the Count dies. He doesn't even get out of his coffin. He dies like a little pansy-ass bitch. After all this talk of being noble and being boyard and being master and being descendant from Attila and the Huns and this great noble powerful lineage, he dies in his box like a bitch. And I think that is a perfect ending. He doesn't get to fight. He gets to die. Perfect ending. Not cinematic. That's why it's often changed. Whatever. I don't care. I loved it. Unfortunately for our party, Quincy suffered a very nasty injury during the battle. Mina sees that Quincy is dying, and she rushes from where her and Van Helsing were hiding. She also participated in the fight, by the way. She was wielding a pistol like a badass. But she runs down to Quincy, and she pulls him into her arms. And he just passes away, surrounded by his friends, and knowing that he did a good thing. And something that I have neglected to mention is a correlation between Drac and Mina. Now, chapter 4, before Dracula leaves the castle, Jonathan goes down into this crypt, and he finds Drac laying in one of his earth boxes. And he is so terrified, and he's so done with the Count's bullshit that he tries to kill him. He picks up the shovel that's just laying around, and he goes to like bash the Count's face in, but the Count moves and it scares him, and the shovel falls and it cuts the Count across the forehead. The scar doesn't heal. When the Count is attacking Mina in her bedroom, the men note the scar. They know that it's Dracula, not just because he's, vamping on Mina, but because he still has the scar that Jonathan gave him. Which I think is fantastic. Like, Jonathan marked the Count. I feel like that's another reason that Drac went after Mina so hard, is because she is the wife of the man who marked him. Soon after, Mina is bitten by the Count, and they're trying to hunt him down. Van Helsing tries to bless Mina, and he takes a Catholic communion wafer, and he tries to touch it to her forehead, and it burns. It leaves a huge burn on her forehead. When I was doing the analysis for this, and I read that, I couldn't believe, and maybe it's coincidence, but I don't think so. Dracula and Mina both bear the same scar in the same place, caused by different things, but that's such a specific area that it's gotta be intentional. And if it's not, then maybe I'm just barking up the wrong tree, but the fact that Dracula and Mina are both scarred in the same way, and we see Mina's scar heal as Quincy is laying in her arms dying. He says something along the lines of let's see. I am only too happy to have been of any service. Oh God, he cried suddenly, struggling up to a sitting posture and pointing to me. It was all worth this to die. Look, look. And the mark on Mina's forehead is gone. The book ends with a little epilogue by Jonathan that takes place 7 years after the events of the Count. The remaining members, they all travel back to Transylvania. They all go on like a little remembrance trip, and they go to remember Quincy, and Jonathan and Mina take their son, Quincy, with them to Transylvania. And Jonathan ends by saying that one day he hopes his son will know what a remarkable woman his mother was. And that's the end of the book. I cannot stress how much I love this book. I know, probably an hour and a half, 2 hour video. I get it. It was a lot of rambling, a lot of raving. I had a lot that I wanted to talk about. I didn't even get to all of it. But if you watch to the end, congratulations, you get a cookie, you get my thanks and my gratitude. You really buffed my watch time. I really appreciate it. Dracula is not perfect. If you've seen my spoiler-free review, I've talked a little bit about that. If, I talked about some of the attitudes the men have towards women in this book. It's not perfect, but it is a dang good read. I highly recommend it. I would give everyone a copy of this book if I could. Please do go check it out. $10 $10 Barnes & Noble Classic Edition. Amazing. Any of these, I think there's manga form if you want to read it in a graphic novel form. There's a comic book. There are so many good. I think I got this one here. I think I got this one for like $5 at Barnes & Noble. So please, please, please go check out Dracula. Check out the audiobook. I think there are tons of free audiobooks of it on YouTube. Don't tell anybody I told you. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. This has been Dracula, the in-depth review and analysis. I hope it made sense, even a little bit. Editing me? Did it make sense? Did we do good? Editing me? Don't kill me, please. Next week, we'll be taking a look at what it takes to adapt a novel to a different format. And we'll be taking a look at several adaptations of Dracula. So I hope you're not sick of the Count, because I know that I'm not. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, guys. I really appreciate it. Until next time, bye!